care introduced into the legislature. If I had to pick one word that typifies John and Kari, his wife, it would be service. You can't go anywhere in this general area and not hear about John Albers and what he has done or is doing. And we thank you for that. John is he graduated from the University of Louisville. He completed some other courses at the University of Georgia, so that makes him a Dogs fan. He is a fourth generation firefighter, and his two sons are now involved in that, so they are a fifth generation firefighter. He has been married to Kari, who has been his backup for 29 years. And Kari, you've done a great job with him. He has a number of awards that he has received. I'm not going to bore you with all those awards, but John would be glad to show you them if you make an appointment. The thing that I think that stands out is you can't go anywhere in Roswell without running into John, and you see him serving the community. He is a participant in our job networking program. He is a member of this church. And I would just say he's a good all-around guy. And it's my pleasure to introduce him to speak to you this morning.
Thank you, Roger. That was wonderful. Thank you for allowing me to be here today. I will tell you that I am by far the oldest person here, though, because in politics, you age in dog years. So I'm 149. Good news, I don't feel a day over 137. You've already mentioned my wife, Kari, being here. So blessed to have a wonderful covenant with God for our marriage. We have been married for 29 years, but in 3 weeks that'll flip over to 30. So that's always an exciting time for us. And she's had the last 13 years of anniversaries while I'm in a legislative session. So pray for me. I wanted to give you a little background before I shared my story today. I have been baptized, confirmed, and grew up in the Methodist Church all of my life. My sister is a retired Methodist minister. In fact, just the other day, I had found my my Sunday school pins from back when I was a child, which started out with year 1, year 2. If some of you ever had those, I got up to 13 when I guess I was fully confirmed and finished youth group and moved on to college. Also honored to be here. Prior to us coming to RUMC, we made the big leap all the way from Hickory Flat United Methodist Church. So it wasn't too far down Highway 140. I've got to serve with many of you in different committees, the Board of Stewards, in his Steps Committee. I chaired and led the Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts for years, and obviously job networking, which has been so special with the Simons and Jay Litton and everyone else. So I really, really enjoy the opportunity to do that. And unfortunately, the things I do now eat up a lot of my time, so I don't get to spend as much time doing those in the past, but I do get an occasional call from a job seeker still that I help to hopefully get over the goal line. A little bit more of a background. I was so excited to see that Charlotte was on the video call today, because I'd be remiss if I had just mentioned Malone, who we all dearly loved, and not just as a pastor and a spiritual mentor, which he was certainly to me, but as a friend. As a Rotarian, we were on several boards of charities together. And boy, I know he's in heaven, because if he's not, none of us stand a chance. And then also my good friend, Mike Long, before we were fortunate enough to have Tom come lead the church. I have to tell you this story because I'm going to tell on myself, just a little background. Mike and I got along very well, used to meet regularly. In fact, we often joked that our jobs had more in common than either of us wanted to admit. But he called one day, and back when we had home phones and caller IDs that we look at, and I saw him dialing in, and I was doing some work, and I thought, if I answer this phone, I'm going to be voluntold to do something else, and I'm just too busy. So I let it go to voicemail. Well, a minute later, the phone rang again, only this time my son Will, who I'm going to talk about, answered the phone. He said, "Oh, Dr. Long, great to talk to you." "Oh, yeah, Dad's right here. I don't know why you didn't answer the phone." So I picked up the phone. Mike, how you doing? He said, are you screening my calls? I said, I got to admit, I did. So long story short, he goes, why were you screening my calls? I said, because you're going to call and convince me to do something, and I'm too busy to do it right now. Well, he did exactly that. So that's how I joined the In His Steps Committee, by the way, for 5 years. So I wanted to tell you as I begin here that I am not necessarily an emotional person, but there will be times that it's going to struggle for me to get through this. And to those who got to hear some of this or most of this at the men's breakfast a few months ago, I apologize that there'll be a little bit of a repeat. But what you see behind me is a picture of our family in 2020. In fact, it was August of 2020 that everything in my life seemed right. I was so content with our family, with my faith, with work, with the way I was able to serve people, and just the sense of accomplishment of accomplishing things for anybody on any given day. In fact, that almost seems surreal to me now that I thought I had this whole life thing all figured out. Kari and I, at the time of this, have been married for 27.5 years. Our oldest son, Will, had graduated from college. He had bought a house. He was engaged to be married. He was working for the GBI, that's the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. And everything seemed perfect. Wonderful girl. They've been dating for 4 years. We were excited about that and maybe some future grandkids. Our younger son, Ryan, had just started college. Scholarships galore, honor student, easiest young man that we ever could have hoped to have raised. And he was starting his next chapter of life, and as were we, to be empty nesters, which we were excited about. As much as we loved our kids, we were ready for that next move. Even though COVID at the time was in its peak, it was a joy for me to be able to help other people by solving problems for businesses, for delivering PPE, remember that, to fire stations and police stations in the back of my SUV, to literally working 20+ hours a day trying to solve problems. But the reward was so great knowing that I could make a difference. After all, that's what God called me to do. I'm there to help and serve other people. Will, our older son, always had an issue that the doctors monitored, what's called your creatinine level. And it was always a little high, even when he was 6 years old when we first got it measured, but they never thought it was anything of concern. In fact, we had been to the doctor year after year after year, and at one point they did give him one pill to help flush his kidneys, but we didn't think it would ever be a problem. Well, Will was 24 years old, and they're all superhuman at 24 years old, right? Well, if you see that picture, he's the one on the far right. He's a stick, and he lost 20 pounds. And he was down to a little over 100 pounds. Of course, Kari and I encouraged him to go to the doctor, but when you're 24, you don't do that. Then he called us one day as he was driving from our house here in Roswell to Ackworth, which is about a 25 to 30-minute drive. And he said, Dad, I had to pull over and take a nap. I was so tired. That led to him being sick to his stomach and then vomiting blood. That took us from the doctor's office to the emergency room to the intensive care unit at Cherokee Northside Hospital. And click that for me. Yeah. Yeah. We're having a slide problem. Hang on a minute. There we go. Okay. Technical difficulties. August 27th, 2020 was one of the toughest moments of my life at that point. Will had been rushed to the hospital. He was in ICU. COVID was off the charts. Access to the hospital was limited. And I broke every single rule. Yay. Good for you. As a firefighter and an EMT, I was able to meet Nancy on the west steps of Cherokee Northside Hospital, who threw me a set of scrubs, which I changed in my car, and I got to hold his hand in ICU. No parent should ever see their child with that many tubes coming out of them. As I was holding his hand, the doctor was talking to us both. he gave me that nod to walk out into the hallway. We walked out in the hallway. He looked at me and he said, John, everything is shutting down, all of his organs, and we don't know why. And we don't know if he'll make it through the night. I knew what he was telling me. I had been doing this for a very long time. I was utterly helpless. There was nothing I could do but to hold his hands and pray. I think it was so bad, and she's still mad at me. I didn't even tell Kari because I knew she couldn't get to the hospital and she couldn't do anything. It was a very difficult night, but thank God that they figured out what was wrong about 4 o'clock in the morning. Both his kidneys were shut down completely, never to come back. So early that morning, my 24-year-old son had an emergency procedure into his chest and began dialysis. It was frightening. However, we knew that this would be the one thing that could save his life right now. They hooked him up to the machine, and we spent the next 9 days in ICU and then a regular room, but eventually able to go home, even though 3 times a week he would go to the dialysis clinic with others to be hooked up to the machine. While this was devastating, we were just joyous that he was alive. And we looked forward to better days ahead, the things that we were going to be able to do, positive thoughts. He had a wedding coming up in just 2 months. Of course, I was in the middle of an election, which probably didn't need to happen at that time either. All right, it's working. The verse that I sent over to Lynn when we first started talking is, God will carry you through the storm. Isaiah chapter 43, verse 2. You know, when it rains, it pours. Well, everything in our life went sideways after that. My uncle, and I only have one, called just a month or 2 later. He has stage 3 lung cancer and was given a 25% chance to live. My father called up. He needed 2 major surgeries, although they're not life-threatening. My dad, in his age, always seems to get a staph infection when in a hospital. And that was very concerning for all of us. And then in March, a nasty group out of Washington, D.C., who called themselves the Lincoln Project, sent a series of tweets about me and others saying that I had supported a terribly racist bill about voting, copied my employer and all of our Fortune 500 clients. Now, the bill that I sponsored was bipartisan. It actually said that an absentee ballot would have a state seal and a precinct number on it, and everybody supported it. That happened on a Thursday night. On Friday morning, I had a call with our board, and they said, oh gosh, John, don't worry about it. These people are terrible. They're actually sexual harassers, pedophiles, and money launderers. They're just a disgraced group, and we know this isn't true. Don't worry about it at all. At 5 o'clock, they gave me a severance package, and I lost my job because the heat had gotten too much, especially for those who are our clients on the West Coast. And then in April, Will's new wife handed him divorce papers and walked out on him after 6 months. She couldn't take it. And then in May, what was supposed to be a quick sign the papers and walk away became a money grab divorce problem. All this, we're trying to navigate the transplant process to figure out whether Kari and I can be a match, which is about one of the most bureaucratic, broken processes there are. Kari and I are very type A. We're very well connected and pretty well educated, and it was very difficult. Which leads me to June. As we're going through the testing process to find out whether I could be a match to Will or Kari could be a match to Will, it's many days of medical testing. And when Kari came home, and when she walked in, she was pale as a ghost. I said, honey, what's wrong? They think there might be something majorly wrong with me, and they've made me an emergency appointment at a nephrologist tomorrow morning. Wow. You know that old adage that God never gives you more than you can handle? I think God way overestimated what I could handle and take at the time. So I walked upstairs to our bedroom and I fell on my knees. I didn't get down on my knees. I literally, my body collapsed and I fell on my knees. And I said these words, I surrender. Lord, I always thought I was called to help everybody else. That was my job. But there's nothing I can do at this point. I surrender. I never prayed for anybody. I prayed for everybody else, never for myself in my entire life. I only prayed for other people. And I said, Lord, this is my prayer and petition. I need help. Heal my wife. Heal my son. Help me to get through this, to persevere. Give me strength. Forgive everyone who I think did me wrong in this process. And forgive me for every part that I may have played in it. I surrender everything to you. It was that moment of my entire life. Well, God has a great sense of humor with me, because the next morning, Kari went to the doctor, came home, she said, it was a misreading. She's fine. And let me tell you what happened in the next 6 days. I got the greatest phone call I could ever get in my life. Doctor called me and said, John, you're not just a match to give your kidney to Will. You're the best match I've ever seen in my career. Wow. My wife's soon-to-be ex-wife. Oh, sorry, my son's soon-to-be ex-wife. That came out wrong. I've introduced you to my first wife, Kari. My son's soon-to-be ex-wife dropped everything, signed the papers, and walked away. My uncle rang the bell, cancer-free. My dad got home, did second surgery, perfectly fine. I got offered not one, not two, but 3 new jobs. And the surgery that was going to be 2 to 3 months later got moved up to 2.5 weeks later. That happened 6 days before I said those words, I surrender. So if you're thinking what I thought at the time, John, you dummy, why didn't you do that 8 months ago? I realized that was part of what the Lord wanted from me, even though I wish I could have maybe done that differently now. Along the way, God sent angels to light the path for us. We had kept our situation very quiet. The only people that knew were a handful of friends and our family what was going on. Will, who had been married, who had a house, who had his whole life ahead of him, now was divorced. We had to sell his house because he needed 24-hour care, and he was in our basement living with a tube coming out of his stomach at the time. The only good news is we could do dialysis at home. But dialysis, unfortunately, just barely keeps you alive. It does not give you what you need, which causes all such other medical problems. We had many trips to the hospital, etc. But he came upstairs to where my home office was and said, Dad, I think we should make our story public and share it. Now, Will's a very private person where I'm clearly not. And I said, are you sure you want to do that? Dad, you know, if more people are praying for us, wouldn't that be a good thing? If one person goes to the doctor and doesn't wait like I should have, which, by the way, we found out later, if Will had waited one more day to go to the hospital, he absolutely would have died. And he said, if one more person goes out and decides to be a donor like you, maybe they save somebody's life. I was so proud of him. Here's a young man who had pretty much lost everything in his life, who had that feeling, that emotion, and that push from the Holy Spirit to do something extraordinary. So we did. Now remember, just a few months earlier, I got canceled by social media. So I put up on LinkedIn, for our job networking folks, our story. 13.8 million people, as of a couple of days ago, had read our story all over the world. We got 482,000 direct messages and comments. People in St. Peter's Basilica praying for us. People on the wall in Jerusalem praying for us. People in churches in Peru praying for us. Mosques in the United Arab Emirates doing a dawah and praying for us. Buddhist temples in India praying for us. People offering to send us prayer blankets, to send us food, we had people from Oklahoma said, we'll drive to your house and help cut your grass if you need it. It was the most humbling and overwhelming outpouring that I've ever seen, and really restored our faith in humanity, to be quite honest. People right here in this church, our neighbors, our Rotarians, business colleagues, constituents, and perfect strangers did meal trains and everything else. In fact, we got so much food, we had to start giving it to the neighbors and their families. It was awesome. The connections I made was awesome too. I got to do through Facebook a video chat with a mom in Australia who is my exact age, whose son she gave a kidney to, who was Will's exact age. And I spent 15 minutes talking to her literally on the other side of the earth. The messages were so inspiring and really gave us amazing amount of joy and faith through that process. This is 5 a.m., July 21st, 2021, 18 months and 8 days ago. Not that I'm counting. That's Will and I walking arm in arm to Emory University Hospital very early in the morning. And I'm sure many of you know this verse well, Philippians 4:6-7. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God. And peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. I repeated that 300 or 400 times that morning to myself and to Will. Sometimes when Kari and I talk, she gets up and will tell you what exactly happened that day. We got there, we went through our typical pre-op stuff you would do for surgery, and I'd never had a surgery before, to be honest with you. They wheeled us back to the operating room and the power went out. I'm not kidding you. The power went out at Emory Hospital for hours. And while they have a backup generator, they will not start a surgery on power, on backup power. So that began our morning, continued on, and I expected to be in the recovery room somewhere around 10 or 11 a.m. and woke up at 3:30 and thought something was wrong and nothing happened. Only to learn that I was out and Will was still in, and he would be for another several hours. And all I could think of and pray is, Lord, please, 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 let Will accept my kidney. It was a long day, and if you have to understand my personality, they got me back in my room. They told me to rest, and I just started going back to work and doing what I do. They said you had to walk around the floor at least one time and ring the bell. So I walked it about 6 times, just because I felt like I needed to, waiting for Will to get out and run off that nervous energy. Although if you see me, it's a pretty sad state. But Will got out, thank God. And his room was right outside of where you ring the bell. And the nurses told Kari that her boys were both spicy. So I'm not sure exactly what that meant, but rather than making the walk around the hall, Will walked out 3 steps, rang the bell, and went back to bed. This is one of my favorite pictures in the world. On July 1st, 2021, the devil whispered in my ear. And he said, "You're not strong enough to withstand the storm." On July 21st, I whispered back in the devil's ear. And I told him, I'm a child of God, and I'm a man of faith, and a warrior of Christ. I am the storm. And with that, we changed everything in our family. My faith, which was running pretty low for a while there, had been tested to its limits, went all the way off the charts, higher than I could ever even imagined God would give and take me. For those that don't understand how well prayer works, we didn't have a prayer group. We didn't have a prayer army. We had a worldwide prayer army that allowed us to walk into surgery with not an ounce of concern, only hoping and praying for the doctors and for the outcome for Will. 2 days later, I was home. 3 days later, Will was home. That's a picture of us on July the 24th. I went back to work 7 days later. Although Kari will tell you I went back to work 2 hours later from my telephone. There was no more dialysis for Will. He felt better an hour and a half after that surgery than he did when they started the surgery. And he had just been in and cut open for 6.5 hours. He already felt better because his body was doing what it needed to do. This is 1 month later. Will had all his color back. When he had dialysis, he was just pale as a ghost. His eyes almost looked jaundiced. He looked sick. He gained 29 pounds. He looked great. He was eating us out of house and home. And it was a joy just to go out and to celebrate that and have our son back. And 3 months later, we celebrated his 26th birthday in Aruba. It was great because Will, for over a year, couldn't take a shower, couldn't get in a swimming pool, couldn't go in the water, but he could do all those things. There was no greater joy that Kari and I could possibly have than to see that smile on his face as he was rebuilding himself figuratively and literally. There's an old adage, you can't connect the dots looking backwards, right? You can only, looking forwards. You can only see them looking backwards. If you think about it, I could never have put together all those pieces until I could look back and say, of course, Lord, I understand. Because when we're all in that time, we're struggling with doing the things we need to get done. You have to understand Kari and I's personality. Something goes wrong, we fix it. We fix it. I'll be candid with you. We really just processed this whole thing about 4 months ago. Sitting on our back porch one night having dinner, both of us realized we had not actually fully dealt with the entire situation. I think we're getting closer. The miracles that we saw along the way, the pure joy we experienced was awesome. And we didn't witness one miracle. We didn't witness two. We had dozens of them. We also have a new mission and calling. God could have had this happen to anyone, but he had it happen to us. He could have had this circumstance be for someone who could use it as a platform to help other people, but he didn't. And from that, we knew we had a new calling in life. And the calling we do have. I passed what's called the Giving the Gift of Life Act last year for Georgia. There are 115,000 people at any given time that are on the transplant list to receive an organ. God gave us 2 kidneys. Guess what? We only need 1. Your liver is the only organ in your body that regenerates, and you can actually donate a portion of it to someone else who needs it. You can give bone marrow, and I hope everyone here, I'll talk about this moment, will make sure they've checked that box on your driver's license. And here's the part that you may not know. You need to talk to your family about that, because almost every time when we're getting ready to be called home by the Lord and you're not able to speak for yourself, a family member overrules your final wishes and says, oh, I don't know if I want dad or grandpa or grandma or my son or daughter to be held alive for a few more hours while they go through that process. You need to let them know that's what you want. That is my final wish, to take everything from this earthly body that I have and live on. And God willing, that'll be one more reason that when I kneel before the Lord one day, he might give me a seal and head me north. The law that we passed, by the way, make sure that nobody who does what I do will ever either lose or get their life insurance canceled. Do you know the average life expectancy for people that donate organs is 5 years longer than anyone else? Also, make sure that to help out with any costs, up to a $25,000 tax exemption is available to people, because we want to, yes, incent people to do good. We're working on this in all 50 states. We have passed 9 so far. We introduced Michigan just a few days ago for number 10. And I hope by the end of this year, we'll have close to 20 states done. I'm also working on a federal version of this bill. I'm also working with Delta Airlines and all the other airlines to make sure that organs are transported properly. You see, before 9/11/2001, which we all remember, organs were brought onto an airplane and literally sat in the cockpit with the pilots. Kind of a small, cool looking thing. Well, after 9/11, they were all moved to the cargo hold. And we've lost several hundred organs over the last 20 years that have either lost, been damaged, a myriad of issues, and those hundreds of people did not get a life-saving organ and did not live. I'm hoping to have that fixed here in the next month or two, once and for all. Delta and all the major airlines will do that, and they'll be back up with me, which will make a big difference. I've also joined lots of boards and been helping out in that vein, and so has Will. When we go around sometimes and share our story together, but also he identifies, obviously, to people at a younger age that most people don't think of. And I have to share a story with you. Right about a year ago, I got a call from someone who I've known for some time. And he said, John, I've got good friends who their son just found out that he's got a kidney disease and he's going to need a transplant. Would you help them? I said, of course I would. So I started talking to David, who lives in Sandy Springs, who's got a son named Will. Will was 17 years old at the time. He was in high school and just found out that he was going to need a transplant. Their family was devastated, and they just started Will on dialysis, and they got their first monthly bill for $75,900. They're both self-employed. The world was crashing down, even more so on his parents than they were on their son Will at the time. First thing we did is, believe it or not, no matter what age you are, if you're in renal failure for a kidney, you can go on Medicare. We got him on Medicare, and the $75,900 bill went down to $0. Then all the things that Kari and I had learned about that long bureaucratic process about getting an organ donation, which they said we had beaten all the odds by doing it in just less than a year. Less than 6 months later, their Will went to Emory Hospital University and got his kidney transplant, and Will is having a great, successful year in college, completely healed now. And there's another story, and a story after that, and a story after that to help out. We have worked with Emory directly, as well as Piedmont Hospital, to help them fix the bureaucracy and streamline that process, as well as the organizations that many of you heard of, the National Kidney Foundation, National Kidney Registry, the Liver Foundation, et cetera, and to pull all those groups together to stop competing against one another and working together to make sure we do one thing. And that is, I will not rest until that transplant list is down to 0. 1, it will be one too many. And we can do that together. So what can you do? You can become a living donor, and at any age. We talked already about your driver's license. Make sure you look at the front of your driver's license to show you're an organ donor. And again, make sure you talk to your family. If you are sick, or someone in your family or your friend group is, go see a doctor. Do not wait. Helping other people is always there. I'll be right there. And the prayers, which we all know are so important, even to those that may be unchurched or have not yet found their path with faith. Pray for them anyway. Pray for them more so, and tell them that you prayed for them. There's so many people that I could sit here and thank along the way that have helped us in the journey, but if I did, I would likely forget one person, or we would be here until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So I'm going to finish off, and I'm actually open up to some questions and talk a little bit more about this faith journey. And I realize this is more of a story than a necessary teaching lesson. But I hope the message from that is surrendering everything to the Lord is always going to be the right answer. First, I want to talk to you about how bright the future is. Most of you in this room drove here today. Now, when you get back into your car, if you're like me and most people, you get in the car, you buckle your seatbelt. The first thing you instinctively do is you look at that rear view mirror and adjust it. There's a reason that rear view mirror is so small and the windshield is so big. You want to check it to make sure things are safe, but everything else is in front of us. And that's where we have to keep our focus and our vision. Together, each one of us can save lives, whether it be spiritually or here with our earthly bodies. Sharing this story is a joy for me, as emotional as it may be. But I'll finish off Ephesians chapter 3, verses 20 to 21. Now to him who is able to do far more abundantly than all that we asked or think, according to the power at work within us, to him be glory, and the church in Christ Jesus throughout all generations, forever and ever. Amen. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share this morning. I hope that I can be of great service to you, whether it has to involve someone doing an organ transplant or anything else that I can serve you in. Please know that I'd be honored to do that. And I would gladly open it up to answer any questions that anybody may have.
You said it was not age related. We have a lot of gray hairs in here. So regardless of your age, there is an opportunity. I thought so.
Yeah, so it used to be that you were not going to donate organs after you hit a certain age, or especially if you had any medical issues that would prevent you. That's one of the things that I, along with a lot of other people, are working to change. Because in the past, we just said, well, that didn't make sense. Well, you know what? If you can give an organ to someone, whether they are 60, 70, or 80 plus years old, and you can help them, whether that's helping their life for 5, 10, 15, or 20, or 30 years, why would we not? So the thinking, honestly, was wrong for a very long time. They thought of everything in the perfect sterile world. And I think now people are open to changing their minds of how that works, thankfully.
So an older person can give to a younger person?
You can. Most of the time you give to someone who's closer to your age. Will was the a little bit of a difference because of the 5 and I was 40. But that wasn't that far off, thankfully. But usually it's going to be closer to your age bracket to have folks together. Yes, sir.
Is there any kind of transplant network that you could volunteer to other than your driver's license?
That's a great question. So there are a lot of transplant network and organizations, and I think to make it easy, what I'll do is I will work to get the information out. We can email it to everybody to be a part of. Great opportunity to help and serve in that method. So thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Today, and what is he doing?
That's a great question. Thank you so much for asking about Will. Well, to Kari and I's much surprise, Will got over 140 pounds, which is amazing. And he looks great and feels great. He moved, got a promotion from the GBI, works for the Georgia Department of Insurance now, does insurance fraud investigations. Fascinating stuff. It's amazing how hard people can work to break the law. But great for him because GBI was a great career, but he was working nights and weekends and often by himself. Now he works with this great group of people, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. He is doing a lot of things I'm doing with helping out organizations. In fact, we're working together with Delta and the TSA and the FAA to fix the things I talked about transporting organs. He lives right here in Roswell, just about a mile away from us in downtown Roswell, in an apartment with a friend. And he's been out dating a little, so we're cautiously optimistic there as well. So I'm just hoping for those grandkids still.
What about your other son? How did he handle all this?
Our other son, Ryan, it was very tough for him because all of this unfolded when he had just gotten to college and I'm sorry, he's at the University of Alabama. But they gave him, oh, okay, all right. They gave him more scholarships than he could have at home with the Zell Miller and even the Hope Scholarship. But it was very difficult for him because he literally wasn't here as well. So
He graduated in the middle of all this.
Yeah.
2020, and we sent him off to school in the middle of all this.
yeah, so he, in the middle of COVID, he was the COVID class of graduation that missed their kind of final year, et cetera. So he went through a bunch of stuff as well, but fortunately, he was able to really keep things on track well. He's doing very well. And Will went down the law enforcement side for first responders. Ryan's a firefighter and EMT while in college. So that is a great outlet for him and certainly makes me very proud because myself, my father, my uncle, my great-grandfather, and my great-great-grandfather have all served as firefighters and or police officers. So a great joy there. He's doing well. He's actually third year at Alabama. He's in graduate school. Thank God he takes after Kari and not me. Yes, sir.
I'm a retired Delta pilot. I retired in 1999. I was stunned that you could no longer transplant organs in the cockpit. You carry them all the time.
Thank you for saying that. And I appreciate all the times you flew and did that because you literally were helping to save somebody's life. So we're working on getting organs back into the cockpit of airplanes. They'll also have priority takeoff and landing. And someone will be waiting there to literally take it down those steps right off the jetway and bring it to where it needs to go. Because what we're doing today is a small fraction of what I hope to be doing in the next 2 to 3 years. And we're transporting hundreds of thousands of people, not tens of thousands. Yes, sir.
Yes, I flew for an airline too. I carried many organs under the jumpsuit back behind me. But what happened is it scared the heck out of the FAA because you could not vet the person that was putting the organ or what was in the cooler because we couldn't check it and it was a perfect place to load a bomb on the airplane. But scared the heck out of the FAA. That's why they said, oh, no more. But there should be some way to get around that. Of course, it's been a long time since I've flown. But, oh yes, I carried many. It got to the point where in the hustle and bustle of unloading the airplane, getting everyone off and the mechanics coming on and all that, sometimes those organs would be left in the cockpit and forgotten. And I got on airplanes, early morning flights, and there'd be a cooler under the jumpsuit. It got so that I personally would not leave that airplane until someone picked up that box. Many times I waited a long time till somebody came and got it. And I raised such a fuss that they did get it. But anyway, that's my story.
Well, thank you for that. And technology is now helping. I'm working with a group called UNOS, which is the United Network of Organ Sharing. And we are actually putting little tiny devices on, it kind of looks like a cooler called a cycler machine for a kidney, as an example. And we can track it literally by GPS where it is at every single stage to know when people have picked it up and to make sure that organ gets safely
Like an
transported.
Apple AirTag.
Yes, thank you. Yes, sir.
Have you connected with the Cleveland Clinic?
I have talked to the Cleveland Clinic, yes, but if you have better connections than the first person I talked to, I'd love to hear them. Yes, ma'am. What led me to run for office? That's a good question. I always felt God had called me to do that, even as a very young man. And I didn't know what that really meant when you're a kid. But back in 2009, earlier in the actually about this time in 2009, a friend of mine, his name was Dan Moody, who was my predecessor, asked to meet me at the IHOP right up the road here on Highway 9. Dan had been in office for coming on his 8th year, and I had helped him. I had helped him to run for office. I had helped one of the first fundraisers for Tom Price when he had ran for Congress years ago at our house. So I was always involved and liked to help people that I cared about, whether it be a city council, a county commission, state or federal office. And Dan said to me, he said, "John, I'm going to retire." I said, "Dan, you can't retire." I said, you're so good at this. Well, for the next hour, Dan was trying to convince me to run for office, and I was trying to convince Dan not to retire. And ultimately I said, well, Dan, I said, I can't do this at this point in my life. My kids are too young. He said, well, John, that's the great thing about serving at the state level. You get to come home every night. And that was very important to me because I was not going to go to Washington, D.C. 45 weeks a year and miss my children grow up. I knew my most important title was husband and father. So long story short, we ended up doing it. We had a family meeting. In fact, I'll tell you a story. There's a Mike Long story in here that's actually worth telling. I met with a family. We had a family meeting. Then I talked to folks that I had great respect for, friends, family members, etc. Finally got to the point where I really wanted to talk to Mike as kind of my last gate of whether I was going to do this or not. And we just had this scheduling problem. We could not get together. So we talked on the phone. He said, you know, I know you want to meet in person, but you want to just talk over the phone right now? So I told Mike the entire story of why I kept thinking I was getting all these signs to run for office. And Mike, you know, he got a pause for a minute. He goes, well, sounds like that old story. You know, that guy who his sailboat sank in the middle of the ocean. He was bobbing up and down. He said, Lord, please save me. You know, about an hour later, Coast Guard gutter came by and said, oh, we're here to save you. And the guy said, no, thanks. The Lord will save me. Right. About 4 hours later, he's kind of struggling. And a rescue plane comes overhead and says, sir, we're here to save you. He goes, nope, the Lord will save me. About 7 hours later, he's literally on his last breath. And the helicopter comes over. The guy comes down on the rope ladder, getting ready to pull him out of the water. Sir, we're here to save you. He goes, nope, the Lord will save me. Well, a few minutes later, he drowned and died. And then he was standing before the Lord. And he said, Lord, I just don't understand it. He goes, I reached out to you. I cried out to you, and you said you'd save me. And the Lord said, I sent a boat, a plane, and a helicopter. What more did you want? But then he said, just remember, John, he didn't say you'd win. And I said, what do you mean I wouldn't win? And I'm going to tell you one more story that you didn't ask for, but this is an important component of faith. I decided to run for office, and a few months later, we were knocking on doors. Last time I knocked on doors, I think I was collecting money for UNICEF and I was in Sunday school. So I hadn't done that in quite a while. Now, this is the summer, 18 plus months before the election the next year. So this is really early. Most people run for office 2 or 3 months early. I'm running almost 2 years early. And the very first time we did that, I got a group of friends and we went to Horseshoe Bend. And 12 of us went out, teams of 2, and we fanned out to go knock on doors and give people information. We'd gotten to the 4th house and my son, Will, was with me. I think he was 13 at the time. And I'll never forget this image because I walked up this concrete stoop. It was 6 steps, little wrought iron black railing, screen door, and I hit the doorbell. Ding dong. Gentleman walked up, very stately looking, just very stoic. And I said, hi, I'm John Albers and I'm running for state senate. Is now a good time to talk? And he looked at me stone faced and said, no, now is not a good time to talk. I thought, okay. Now Will is down the stoop and he's off to the next house. He's out of there. So I said, oh, thank you. So I turned around, I walked away. You ever feel like somebody's got their eyes just laser beamed in your back? So I turned around and I don't know why I said this. I said, will there be a better time later? And he said, no, there won't be a better time later. So I started walking down those 6 steps and I got to the bottom step and I just had this feeling something was wrong. I turned around and he's standing right in front of the screen door, just as he was. So I said, is everything all right? He said, no, everything's not all right. So I had in my hand what they call these little push cards. It tells you all these things about John. Put him down. I walked up and I stood right in front of him. I said, what's wrong? He said, our son was just diagnosed with inoperable brain cancer and they gave him 3 months to live. Now I'll tell you, I'm a pretty outgoing person, but I'm not sure had I done this in any other circumstance, but I said these words, can I pray for you? And he said, I'd really like that. And he pushed that screen door open. And we walked in, and I can forever remember what his house looks like, because when we walked in to the left, he had a little formal living room, he had a little roll top desk, a small love seat, and white carpet. And that's where we both knelt down on the floor together and prayed for his son. And his prayer was his son could make it through Christmas. And this was summertime. And he did make it through Christmas. In fact, he made it until about 8 or 9 months. They are now long since retired and live in Arizona. But it was such a powerful moment. When it was over, I couldn't go knock on somebody else's door candidly. I actually gathered all the people who were helping me up together, and I told them the story and said we should all go home. So I'm sitting on the back porch of our house. Kari comes in. She goes, "Everything okay?" I said, "I'm going to drop out of the race." She said, "Why are you going to drop out of the race?" I know exactly why God wanted me to run now. He wanted me to go out and do this and meet with this man and pray for him. That was what I'm supposed to do. And I was perfectly at peace with it. I was just going to drop out. And Kari, in her infinite wisdom, said, "How do you know that you're not going to meet somebody else next week?" She got me there. So again, another God story, and can touch us at any time. So thank you for prompting me on that one. Any other questions? Because if not, I'd like to pray before we end. I'm going to say a prayer if that's okay.
That is good.
That is good. All right. Let's bow our heads and go to the Lord. Lord, I surrender. I surrender everything to you, because there is a difficult world out there, but you alone have our best interests at heart. You alone can move mountains. You alone can be the great physician and healer. You alone can give us peace in our greatest time of angst. Lord, I know you will carry me through the storm. Help me to preach your message to others. Lord, one day we will all stand before you in your altar. And it is my hope and prayer that each and every one of us that are here today will be able to show that we are truly fishers of men. We are the salt and light of the earth. We are to be there for those who need us the most. And we live life Christ-like. For us in Jesus' most holy name, we make our prayers. Amen.
Martha Jane had asked me to introduce John and Kari, and she also authorized me to thank you, John, for being here. And your story, I'm sure, will be repeated a number of times by the people in this room. And we appreciate you as an individual and your family, and we're glad you're our representative. Thank you.